let's start with, when were you born?
Oh, 1932, at the beginning of the Depression, which tells you a lot about me. I was born on the outskirts of Blackpool, a suburb called Bispam, on the North Lancashire coast. My early days, at 7 onwards, it was the war, and the community I lived in was full of evacuated children from London. Troops were based in Blackpool. It was a wholly different environment. We used to fight the evacuees on the golf course. We were so cruel, but I've been told they were the Germans. But finally, we got on with them, and one or two stayed, actually. I kept friends with all through my teens. But it was a funny place to grow up. I mean, it's not a real place dedicated to entertainment, and it's the last place you'd think of to get an education, Blackpool. It was always a bit ramshackle. It did have 3 piers and a place called the Pleasure Beach, which we used to go to on Saturdays by tram. And of course it had trams when no other city did. In fact, I worked on the trams. I was the first schoolboy ever to get a job on the trams. My 18th summer, which I enjoyed thoroughly. In fact, I've enjoyed most of the jobs I've done. But it was fine, and the school was good. I mean, I hated the system where, 5% went to grammar school and 10% to a technical school and the rest to secondary modern, but it worked for me. Not that I'd advocate it, but when I went to the grammar school, I passed the 11 plus, and 3 people in my primary school went, and I was really, for the first 5 years at the grammar school, I was in the bottom class and not doing very well at all. And when I took what is, I suppose, the equivalent of O-level, school certificate, I managed to get enough grade Bs for them to let me into the 6th form, but I had to beg to be allowed in. And once I got in the 6th form, everything took off. And I studied the things I wanted to do, art and history and English. And then I became, towards the top of the people there. I got a scholarship to Cambridge, which I never took for funny reasons, if you want to hear about them.
So at that age, at 16, before you sort of started progressing academically, did you have a vision of what your career might be?
Oh, no. I never did until I actually went to university. I hadn't a clue. I was drifting, really. But it was going to university that changed everything for me.
Really? So let's rewind a bit, because one of the things from talking to a lot of the family is no one really understands who your father was. So I was wondering if you could paint a picture of him for us, please.
Yes. He was a small man, black, wavy hair, tough because he had tough jobs all his life. I hated his politics. He was a right-wing, working-class Tory, and we fought about politics. He'd done all kinds of things. He'd left school at 12 to go to work in the cotton mills. He'd been a soldier in the First World War, went all over the world, came back and was told he'd got TB. So then he married my mother, upsticked, and went to live in Blackpool because he said it would be better for his health. I think it must have been, because he didn't die of TB or anything, and he seemed to flourish. They had a daughter, my sister, who was born in 1923, and then they gave up their newsagent's job, sold it or whatever, never told me what, and went to live in a little suburb called Bispam. And my father then had earned enough to buy a van, a man with a van. And he did flits, haulage, mostly removals, people removing from one place to another. I used to go with him when I was a little older and help as best I could. And he kept on doing this until war came when I was 7. He was just too old to be called up again, thank God. And he got a contract with the Ministry of Pensions, which had been evacuated like everything else. All the hotels were turned into Ministry of Pensions. And they're all up and down the coast of up to Cleveland's, Fleetwood even, down to Lytham. And he took his van up and down that stretch, carrying parcels and files and letters. He said it was the easiest work he'd ever had. They paid him £20 a week. But of course it came to an end when the war finished. So he said, I know what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to get a job inside. So he'd made some contacts, and he was duly appointed as an oily rag, as he called it, not even a cog in the machine. And he sat and did his desk work. He was intelligent enough. And then when they moved to Newcastle. And he lived in Whitley Bay and died just before he was due for his pension. You know, I think they planned it that way, 2 years before. He was looking forward to it. But I wasn't very close to him, but he was popular. You could see that with the way people talked to him. But we never got very close, really, for one reason or another. Still, I missed him.
Adam asks, did he love cheese pie too?
No, that was an acquired taste. When I met Sheila at university, she took me to their home, and Auntie Lottie, the famous Auntie Lottie, made cheese pies, and I loved them. And that was it. So I started about the age of 20, 21. Because I'd been in the army before I went to university. So I was a bit older than most of the people. Yeah, my mother, well, she was fine. She was a good mother, warm, you know, and they were very, very kind and people. And they really wanted the best for me, and they were prepared to let me go on having more and more education, even though they didn't really understand it very much. And when my father died, eventually we persuaded my mother to come to live in Nottingham, because my sister was here, as chance would have it. I was here, you know, so her whole family, and she was stuck up in Whitley Bay. So she spent her final 20 years in Chilwell. And we saw her quite a bit, you know. Joined a bowls club. Seemed to be perfectly happy as far as I could tell.
And as you grew up, could you start to see any of your own characteristics from your parents?
Yes, I mean, I'm very like my mother. Nervous of new things. A bit timid about exploring. She was the same. She used to sit in the house for about 2 days with a hat on if she was going anywhere. I get like this as I get older, but you don't know what age got to do with it, or whether it's actually inherited. It's hard to say. But whereas Adrian's very adventurous, you know, and I'm not.
Yeah. And you say you fought with your father over politics in the house. Where did you think you got your sort of left-wing politics from?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it was the normal stance for youths. And I mean, the arc normally is to move towards the right as you get older. I haven't at all. I'm still as left-wing as I was when I was 18. I can understand why he was a Tory, because he just felt, you know, they made a world in which you could succeed if you worked hard enough. And to an extent, that was true. You know, he died a lot better off than he spent his early years, that's certain. You know, so he had good chances through the governments that were in power. But he could sneer very much at people. He once nearly got me into a fight, actually. And this was about football. He'd take me to see Blackpool play Burnley. And we sat together in amongst all the Burnley fans, and he started sneering at them and saying, "Oh, you've got no one like Stanley Matthews. Oh, you couldn't fight your way out of a paper bag, you lot." I said, "Dad, shut up, shut up." But they all took it cheerfully.
Jess wants to know what your earliest memory is.
My earliest memory is lying in my pram, looking up and seeing men building something. I didn't know what it was or anything, but looking back, it could only have been my father built a garage at the back of our house. And that's what he must have been doing. I was two something, and it's just a vague image, but I think it's a true one. After that, it's all just flashes and bits and bobs. Well, she was a lovely, lovely sister in a way, but, you know, 9 years older, and I must have been more of a pest to her, really. But she used to take me ice skating in Blackpool and things like that, which, looking back, I thought was remarkable that she ever had any time. And when the army came to, and the Navy and the Air Force came to Blackpool, she was over the moon. She was about 18. She had boyfriends galore. And I loved them because they would give me sixpence to keep out the way and things like that. But she was a bright woman. She didn't get the education she needed. She ended up as some kind of in charge of wages at the airport in its East Midlands in its early days. And she was married twice. And but a good woman.
Sarah Jo wants to know about any naughty things you used to get up to as a child.
She wants to know about what?
Naughty behaviour of yours.
Oh, I was as naughty as most people. I don't think I was a real villain, but I mean, I joined a gang of thieves when I was a teenager. And we used to go into department stores and steal things. Even then, I wasn't very adventurous. I more often played the role of lookout. But anyway, we used to steal things, and then we used to hide them under must have been in winter, under a pond in the golf club. We didn't want them. It's just that we wanted the thrill of doing it. And we got caught. And the police came, not to my house. Yes, they came to my house. But the leader of the gang was the son of the vicar. So the vicar said, "I'll sort them out if you'll let me." And he did. He sorted it out.
So what were the circumstances around you joining the army?
At the time, I could have postponed it and gone to university. Or gone to the army, then to university. I'd just had this letter from Cambridge that said, "We would like to offer you," what was it? It didn't say scholarship, I forgot what it was then. An exhibition. So I didn't really know what that was. One of my teachers said it's the same as a scholarship, free. But the letter also said, "Unfortunately, you've no Latin, so you'll have to pass Latin. You'll have to pass Little Go," it said. I thought, what's Little Go? And I asked everyone what Little Go was. No one knew. So I wrote back and said, "Thank you very much, but I'll declined that offer. How little we knew, and went into the army instead, and then went to university afterwards, but to Bristol rather than Cambridge.
So how long were you in the army for?
2 years. They varied. It started at over 2, and gradually they whittled it down to about 18 months. And it finished. It was a gamble for many people because they thought, if I go to university, National Service may have finished by then. You know, that was true for some people. But I took my chance. Spent the most of my time in Egypt.
You must have some stories about that experience.
Oh, well, it was not all fun, but I mean, we were shot at. I remember going down in a convoy in what's called Stengon Alley in Ismailia, lying on the bed of a truck and snipers taking pot shots at us. So it wasn't completely fun, but most of the time it was easy stuff, swimming. I had a little job delivering newspapers to the Middle East, and a gang of trucks. I had something like 12 trucks, went out every morning giving newspapers to. So I'd been sent to Egypt to work on the army newspaper, and it folded just before we got there. So then they changed it into a kind of W.H. Smith's, and I ran that. So it's an easy job.
So I'm assuming that was the first time you left the country?
No, it isn't the first time. I'd been to the Isle of Man, if you call that leaving the country, to celebrate my A-levels. Went with a gang of us, got roaring drunk every night, stole one of those, oh yes, this is another naughty thing. We stole a horse tram and sent it galloping down the road. Nearly got done for that. Also in the hotel at breakfast one morning, one of the maids said, "I liked your song last night." I said, because I've been so drunk, I've been naked standing on a table singing and shouting this song.
You moved to Bristol after the army.
Yeah.
What was the motivation for that?
I can't remember. Well, yes, one of the motivations was a man called Tom Whiteside, who was probably the cleverest boy in our school, a mathematician. And he'd gone to Bristol, and I met him and he said, you know, Bristol is a good university. And he took a general degree, which in those days was unheard of. And he said, I know why. He was taking philosophy, mathematics, and history, I think. And he said, I'm doing this because when I leave here, I'm going to edit Newton's mathematical manuscripts. He said, so I want a good base to do that. He knew what he wanted to do, and he was so clever he did it. Became a professor at Cambridge. So I blindly, knowing, actually we thought, Tom and I, of applying to Canadian universities too. We got close to McGill, but we didn't. And I followed him to Bristol. I was a year behind him. I never regretted it. Very good English department there. I thought a lovely city to live in.
Yeah.
So I had 6, 7 years there, 5 years probably. It was wonderful. I mean, it's opened up a whole world of culture and thinking, and it's marvellous for me. It was such a happy time.
Yeah. What did you study there?
English and philosophy. I was better at English than philosophy, but I enjoyed it.
Do you remember why you chose those two subjects?
I can't remember in detail, actually. Oh, there are also negatives. I didn't want to do Old English and Middle English, and you didn't have to if you did philosophy. I was more interested in what we call modern English, you know. And I had a taste for philosophy anyway.
Yeah. And you met Grandma there?
Yes, she was in the same year as me. She was doing a degree called B.Ed, econ. It was economics and a language. French she was doing. And we met, I don't know, at the union or something, got together, and we were married soon after I graduated. I did an MA in Bristol, and then I applied for jobs everywhere, and I applied all over. Used to have interviews in London for jobs in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, all over. And I don't know what I was being... What they used to do, they used to set up a panel of English professors and, if possible, a representative from the university. And I was interviewed for a job in Hong Kong. And the day I came back from the interview to Bristol, I got a phone call from the guy who'd been the professor from King's on the panel. He said, "I'm not supposed to tell you this." He said, "But they're going to offer you that job in Hong Kong." He said, "But you won't be able to start until Christmas." He said, "In the meantime, would you like to come and work in my department for a term at King's?" So I said, "Would I?" And moved up to London and started lecturing at King's. Anyway, about after one term or so, just at Christmas, I got this letter from Hong Kong saying, "Sorry, you have not been offered the job here, blah, blah, blah." So I went round to the prof's door, said, "What's all this? You told me I was going to be offered a job." He said, "Oh, well," he said, "there was one thing I didn't tell you." He said, "One of your fellow applicants was the Hong Kong professor's wife." I said, "Oh, that's how it works, does it?" He said, "Look, never mind, stay here." So I thought, wow. And I stayed for that year. And then I started applying again, and I applied to Nottingham, interviewed here, offered the job, went back to him. He said, "I thought you were going to stay with us in London." They never told you these things, But anyway, I preferred to come to Nottingham by then. London was a hell of a commute, We're in, the new town, Harlow. So it used to take about an hour and a half to get to work every day. So I was glad to come to Nottingham. That was in 1959.
Dad asks, if you didn't become an academic, what do you think you would have ended up doing?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, what I was beginning to get very interested in an amateurish way, was photography. Something to do with that. I mean, I felt for you when you were moving towards that kind of work, So that would be attractive to me if I could have done something interesting in that line of work, journalism or photography, I think. Yeah. But, I mean, the people that, they had these careers, people at the university, and I went to see them, and they said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I'd like to be like this lot, teach." They said, "Oh, well, only very few get to do that." So I said, "Okay, thanks." And they said, "What else would you like?" So I said what everyone said, BBC? She said, "Oh no, even more difficult." So I said, "Okay, thanks." "Anything else?" I said, "Well, I'm quite interested in a career in curating at museums." No, you can't. We can't advise that. So that's the help I got.
What's been, when you think back on your career in academia, what's been the most rewarding element of it?
The most rewarding thing, I think, is to create a department and help it grow and learn how to manage people and make a happy department. I mean, when I came to Nottingham, I went into the English department, which the first meeting we had to be abandoned because we were all laughing too much. That was wonderful. And then the second one, the professor had retired, And Kingsley came, I never heard anyone laugh again in his department. I hated him so much as anyone. And from then on I struggled to get out of his department, hence American Studies. He did awful things to me.
So you created a new department,
Yeah.
just so you didn't have to work for one individual. What was your...
I mean, I was appointed to teach American literature, but I thought, he told me, he said I could make English just like American Studies. I said, no, you won't. It's always English literature for you. Whereas I genuinely think we want to teach politics and history, as well as literature. And so I became a sub-department of economics, actually, just nominal. And then we gradually worked our way to becoming a department and stayed small for a long time, a very happy, good department. Yeah. It may still be a good department, I don't know. Got about 30 odd teaching now.
What was the main challenge in setting up a new department?
With?
Setting up a new department, or the American Studies?
It's within the arts faculty, which is a very snobbish faculty indeed. All Oxford, Cambridge, all old school, all thought what we were doing was pure Mickey Mouse stuff. And I mean, I'll give you one example. They're doing a lot of realigning the departments where they should be in the big old university building. And the dean said, American Studies will go to the sheds, the temporary sheds behind. I said, why? He said, you're the right size for it. So he said, you'll find it very, very comfortable out there. A few years later, when they were doing some more, I stood up in Senate and said, there's room in the cow sheds for other departments to come. And the dean said to me, if you want to live in the vestibule of hell, Mr. Lee, that's your choice. But we're not moving from this building. I mean, this was their attitude all the time. And yet we became a better, well, I say we were better because we became a 5-star department, which in those days meant you got more staff or money. Yeah. And we're called a flagship department.
When was this happening? When did you set that up?
Early 70s. And it's still going. Yeah. I think it's too big. I mean, I think there's a proper size for a department, especially a department like American Studies, which isn't everyone, and it's not an obvious route to any particular profession. I think it should have said it's about 7 or 8 or 9 people, but there you go.
When we look back on it now, the 60s and into 70s feels like an extraordinary period of cultural change in this country. Was that something that you were acutely aware of at the time? Yes,
largely I was aware of it. The people I worked with in like I'm saying, the history department, and it didn't seem to be, and didn't want it to be. They wanted it to go on forever, teaching Beowulf and that was about it. But some of us were very aware that things were moving on and changing. And felt that the Spanish was a good department, and I remember the professor of Spanish said to me once, he said in the 60s, he said, we used to say, we're coming into a golden age. He said, now, we realised that was it. It's gone. This was back in the 90s, when it had gone. Yeah. And I mean, you can see now the university system is creaking at the joint.
And then of the sort of the pop culture of the era, what did you enjoy the most?
Oh, movies, I guess. American movies. I was never into music at all. Tone deaf, uninterested. But I did enjoy the kind of growth of America as a kind of place to make great movies. I loved it. And of course we incorporated film into the department as soon as we could, in a very rickety way, but we did it.
And did you incorporate the pop films of the time into the
Yes,
studies?
yes, we did. Yeah.
That must have been quite a
Oh,
radical change.
it was. I mean, I actually, it was then I used to say, when they said to me, and what do you teach in your department? I'd say Mickey Mouse mostly.
It sounds like you were rebelling against the system from within. Is that how it feels?
Very much prevailing. Until we started getting stars for research, they had this system of research, and when we became a 5-star department, then they started taking notice. But they did a silly thing. What they did, the university did, to 5-star departments, they gave 2 extra members of staff each, which is the last thing we wanted. And I said to the Vice-Chancellor, what we really need is to give us 1 more member of staff and the money for one of the department to spend a year on sabbatical, writing or researching, or I said that would be far more use to us. He said, I'm sorry, that's what we've decided. So they kept getting more members of staff, and that wasn't what we needed at all.
Why did you retire at the age you did?
I took early retirement 2 years before I was due. I think we were beginning to feel harassed. I had a contract to write a book I wasn't interested in. I spent most of my time sitting on budget committees. It became tedious and threatening, the whole thing. And so I went to see the Vice-Chancellor. I said, I'm thinking of taking early retirement. He said, that's me to think about, not you. So I said, well, I'm thinking of asking you. And then he said, could I offer you any other job at the university? Any, he said. So I said, well, I think I would have been a decent dean, but I think I was hustled out of it. And he said, I could make you dean. I said, I thought it was elected. Oh, no, he said. But anyway, what he did, he gave me a course to teach for 2 years, and I got a third of my salary, which was wonderful. So I just taught film studies on Friday morning. Great.
Brilliant. Solomon wants to know what being a professor is like.
In one way, it's very good indeed, because you've really, I think, reached the top of your career. Some people are not satisfied and they want to go on being vice-chancellors or administrators, but as a kind of real teacher, being a professor is wonderful. A lot of responsibility, because you've got to choose good colleagues to work with you, and you've got to keep their interests in mind all the time. So, you've got a duty of care to people, but on the whole, I think it's the best job I could ever have had. Go for it, Solly.
He also asks if you could rewind time and do it again, would you do it again?
Oh, I would. I'd do it just the same, yeah.
Excellent. So then, at what point did you meet Adrian?
At the university, Adrian was reading English, but she was doing American Studies as a subsidiary. We were obviously attracted to each other, but my marriage was a bit rocky. Your grandma had become full-time devout, wanted to get ordained, spoke to God in the house all the time, It was a crazy world to be in, and we were drifting apart. And Adrian and I, we met while she was an undergraduate, but we had to keep that quiet for quite a long time until she graduated. And in fact, Kinsley, the one I hated so much, called me in, and he said, am I to believe that you are living with one of our students? I said, well, I am. I said, of course you know. He said, you don't get my meaning, he said. Am I to believe that you? So I said, oh, you want me to say, yes, no, I'm not. So he said, well, I will deny it if asked. Yeah. But then, of course, she graduated and went to teach. And we got married eventually. A long, drawn-out divorce. 5 years, as it was in those days, if it was contested, which were hard years.
Fabian asks, did you love being a dad to my mum?
Yes, and always have. Always have. It's one of, my family has made me happier than almost anything. Well, as probably the happiest thing is to have a loving family.
Maddie wants to know, what about fatherhood has delighted you the most?
Well, again, it's something nebulous. It isn't anything special. It's just seeing your children grow and flourish and find their way in life, you know, and find their own love and happiness and independence, and yet still being with them, because we've always been a close family, and that's been a great pleasure for me.
And you've had 5 children, so has it been different each time, or are the same feelings?
Well, different in some ways, yes, in that Adam and Rebecca were there all the time, whereas your father, Nick, and Sarah Jo, obviously we saw them all through their childhood. Adrian worked like hell to keep them on board, wonderfully, and she did. And although it was a great struggle, and financially it was tough, because we were sending half my pay, which was more or less all Adrian's pay as a young teacher, to keep, you know, the whole family going. But the great thing is that they got on with her. That helped. You know, I mean, we had rocky moments, obviously, but we came through, and, you know, we're still a good family. And I thank the Lord and Adrian for that.
What has surprised you the most about fatherhood?
About?
Fatherhood.
The work. Again, you see, it was mostly happiness, but also a lot of anxiety. I mean, for instance, when we were looking for a school for Adam, we must have toured Nottinghamshire about 5 times and been interviewed by about 10 headmasters. But Adrian, again, was kind of industrious and did it all. But, you know, it's tough. And then, of course, taking them to school every day, picking them up every day, you felt like a chauffeur rather than a father most of the time. But on the other hand, you know, to see them playing and learning, it's worth everything, you know, to see them happy. And I think they are. I think they've been a good family. They're just like all ordinary brothers and sisters, which is great, because there's 19 years between Martin and Adam, you know, but they're all close with each other. I like that.
And do you see any of yourself in them, or of your parents in them?
I can't really. I mean, none of them has wanted to become an academic. Well, of course, Sarah Jo has become one, but I like the fact that they all have unique characteristics, really, and I don't really want them to follow me in my footsteps. That's too slavish, you know. I like the fact they've all branched out into different things.
Which novel has really spoken to you?
Millions of them. I mean, I change in this, you know, but I would think a novel like The Adventures of Augie March by Saul Bellow. That was a big novel for me. Discovering Faulkner was also big. But, I mean, I did most of my work on Henry James. And although I'm not as fond of him as I was, I still think he was... T.S. Eliot said of him, he said, he had a mind so fine that no idea could violate it. And I thought, yes, that's it. He was so absolutely lacking in dogma, you know. So I did love James, but I'm one of the very few.
Just asked, are there any characters in novels where you've just identified with, where you've seen yourself in that character?
Well, I think Augie March was one. I was totally different background, different life. I still felt myself in him, you know.
Vincent wants to know who your favourite Forest player has been.
I think Nigel Clough, probably.
What about him?
Well, he was always modest, but he was always in the right place at the right time. And he scored a hell of a lot of goals for Forest. And he was never someone who showed himself off or anything. And it was particularly hard because his father was his manager, and his father used to go at him a lot. But I thought he was a fine Forest player. But there have been a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, Stuart Pearce, he wasn't a great footballer, but he was a great character. So they've had their share of players.
What about of any other team?
Blackpool. I grew up when the Forces were still in Blackpool, and Blackpool was probably the best team in the country in those days. And after they went, some of them stayed on, and Stanley Matthews was the obvious one. I used to stand in the corner where he took his corners from. And I mean, that's a lasting memory. When he played till he was 50, but came back to Stoke, I took Martin, well, I don't know Martin, your dad, he must have been about 4 or 5, but I was determined he'd see Stanley Matthews. And Matthews just walked round the pitch, he did nothing, you know. He was too old to run, but he was adored by everybody, including me.
I've always known you as someone that plays golf a lot. What attracted you to golf? What's special about golf?
Well, one thing about it, I was slightly better at it than I was at most sports. I mean, I love all sports, but I'm no bloody good at them, mostly. I haven't got very good coordination, and I wasn't super special. It wasn't special at golf, but I was good enough, you know, so I had a decent handicap. I went down to 18, which is a good handicap for a club play, you know. And the friends were good. From different backgrounds, all different miners, bankers, but good friends, and healthy. But it wasn't too strenuous. You didn't feel shattered when you finished a game of golf. You felt like a pint.
So Solomon's asking, what's the best piece of advice that you can pass on about how to be happy?
Keep giving. Give love. Give yourself. Don't think about yourself. Give it to other people, your wife, your children, your colleagues, and you'll find that it's repaid. It'll come back to you. Then you'll be happy.
If your 18-year-old self could see how everything has panned out for you, would he be surprised in any way?
Yes, I would be surprised. I think life has been kinder to me than I expected it to be, you know. I expected a kind of mediocre life, really, and didn't realise that I couldn't have envisaged the turns it would take, but they've been better than I ever expected. I've been very lucky to live through the times we lived in, and to have met the people I've met and had the family. All these have been huge bonuses for me.
That's brilliant, thank you. I'm going to finish it there.
Good.
I'm just going to give you a hug. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, James. That was very painless.